I'm Lisa Fletcher, and you're in the stream. Today, Canada's Indigenous communities fight legislation they say erodes their rights and their way of life. Will the government take heed of the Idle No More movement? A topic you, our community, requested. Our digital producer, Malika Bilal, is here looking out for your live feedback. Malika, Canadian Prime Minister Harper, he tweets, but yesterday there was a conspicuously obvious missing element, and that was anything about Idle No More in this Global Day of Action.
Exactly. He didn't mention Idle No More, but lots of other people on Twitter and online did. So what you're seeing on my screen now are pictures from the January 28th Global Day of Action from Idle No More activists around the world. Now, of course, this is something that's been hot online and it's resonated with a lot of you. So for those of you at home, we want you to join the conversation by using the hashtag AJStream.
And joining us on set is Wab Canoe. He is a hip-hop artist, a journalist, and the Director of Indigenous Inclusion at the University of Winnipeg. Postmedia News, a Canadian news agency, has named him one of the 9 Aboriginal movers and shakers that you should know. And we're glad to get to know you. Thanks for being on the stream.
Hey, Anine, thanks for having me.
Your thoughts and ideas help drive this show, and today is no exception. Today's topic, Idle No More, was pitched to us by community member Eric Crow. Eric, thanks for the great show idea. And remember, you too can be in touch on Facebook. Just like the stream, post your comments, and interact with our community about upcoming topics. It's just one more way for you to be in the stream.
I'm Mitra Khalida, the Ideas Editor for Quartz, and I'm in the stream.
The Idle No More protests have gripped Canadians both on and offline. As some demonstrators block highways and stage flash mobs in malls, others are creating memes and holding Twitter storms by bombarding Prime Minister Stephen Harper's account. The reason for much of this is because Indigenous communities are demanding the government stop passing legislation they believe erodes their rights. This mainly comes from a series of recent bills, namely Omnibus Bill C-45. They say threatens their sovereignty and reduces water and environmental protections. But Harper's administration claims that these acts are beneficial. So we contacted the office of John Duncan, Minister of Aboriginal Affairs and Northern Development, and while they declined our request to appear on the program, they stated that working together remains the best way to achieve our shared objective of healthier, more prosperous and self-sufficient First Nation communities. Our government remains committed to working with those Aboriginal leaders who want to work with the Government of Canada to create jobs and growth in their communities. So, the government claims these new laws help the Indigenous community. Native peoples say that's just not the case. But how then do they take their movement forward? And with rumors of growing internal divisions, will Idle No More lose momentum? We have a full Google Hangout today to jump into this discussion. Ellen Gabriel is an Indigenous activist joining us from near Montreal, Quebec. With us from Saskatoon, Saskatchewan is Erica Lee, Idle No More's Facebook page manager. Jarrett Martineau is a community organizer for the Idle No More movement, and he joins us from Victoria, British Columbia. And with us from Edmonton, Alberta is Tanya Capo of the Sturgeon Lake Cree Nation. She is one of the first people to use the Idle No More hashtag, which has been mentioned more than 260,000 times since November. I do want to mention our entire panel is from Canada's Indigenous community. So welcome to the stream, everyone. Wab, I want to start with you. Explain to people a little bit about why this issue is dividing Canadians.
Well, it's a little bit confusing why it's dividing Canadians, because at its heart, Idle No More is about environmental and social justice. And these are things that the majority of Canadians agree with. The thing that causes divisions is because I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about what it is that Indigenous people in Canada are asking for, especially when you get into things like honor the treaties, respect Indigenous rights. I think a lot of Canadians start to think, whoa, hang on, what does that mean? Does that mean that I'm going to have to pay higher taxes? Does that mean that I'm going to have to give up my dream home in the suburbs in order to fulfill some sort of land claim or treaty obligation? But I think Canadians would do well to understand that that's not really the case. This is not a situation where Indigenous people are demanding reparations at their expense, but rather a situation where Indigenous people want to be included in the way forward, and yet to still have the chance to honor their heritage, our heritage, which is to say we still want to have that treaty and constitutional protection that allows us to continue on our way of life. Now, when you broaden it out into a global perspective and you ask why does Idle No More matter to people beyond the borders within Canada, Well, there's a $650 billion reason why this matters. The government of Canada estimates that there's $650 billion worth of natural resources to be developed in our country within the next decade. Steel, diamonds, oil, gasoline, all these things that are needed to drive the global economy. In Canada, in our Constitution, there's a clause called Section 35, which recognizes and affirms Aboriginal and treaty rights. Cut through the legalese, what it means is that we have to talk. The government of Canada, if it wants to develop natural resources, has a duty to consult with Indigenous people, has a duty to consult with what are referred to as Native Americans here in the States. So for the global audience, they should be looking at Idle No More and seeing this as a challenge to that legal authority to develop the natural resources within Canada.
So, Ellen, here's one of the problems, though. The global audience and much of the audience in Canada is keying in more to these misconceptions that Wob is talking about. J28 was yesterday, and while you guys had some good ramp up with media coverage, you've had some good social media coverage. We were following the numbers today. The tweets have gone down. The Facebook connections have gone down with regard to this movement. Are you concerned that these misconceptions among Canadians and elsewhere are going to slow down the movement and possibly derail it?
No, I don't think we can derail a movement that's been going on for, I would say a few centuries. And it's peaking at this point because we have social media. This is one of the tools that I wish we had during the Oka crisis, because social media has been allowing us to continue to educate. And yes, it's, we all have jobs, we all work. So there's going to be a lull. But I think what the important thing to remember is that we need to continue the education, and we need to keep sustaining the fact that it's called Idle No More, but it's really about justice, freedom, and calling to task a government that does not respect the rule of law, has their buddies in the corporations' best interests at heart and not democracy, and to really bring about the human rights aspect of that has been underneath all of the issues that we are talking about, the human rights and the environmental rights. And I think Idle No More will continue. If it fails, then we ourselves allow it to fail, and I don't think we want that.
Well, along the same lines, our community is defining this for themselves. Nora says, Idle No More is a civil rights movement. Until we have justice for all, people will continue to struggle against our racist system. But Jared Martineau in our Google Plus Hangout, I'd like you to address this next one. Data Tech says, the Harper CPC Omnibus Bill, C-45, is the modern day equivalent to handing out smallpox contaminated blankets. Now, this is a term that has been bandied around a lot online. Can you explain what this bill is to our uninitiated?
Well, the Bill C-45 is one among many, and I'm probably actually maybe one of the less qualified people on our panel today. Certainly, I know Tanya has a lot more experience relative to the legislation, but the broad view is that Bill C-45, Bill C-38, as large pieces of omnibus legislation, and a lot of other bills that are being pushed forward by the Harper government are doing their best to erode, especially environmental protections, along with a variety of other changes that are going to severely impact Canada's Indigenous populations, and in ways that people are relating to the ongoing process of colonialism that's been a part of our lives and our nations since the time of first contact. And so I think what people are resistant to is the fact that a lot of these changes are being forced on us without proper consultation to our communities and to our nations. And we haven't been not only included in that process, but we're going to be severely impacted in ways that leave us in a continually disadvantaged position. And that's a part of this movement. It's certainly not the only point of focus, but it's definitely been a huge part of it.
Well, there are people that argue that the movement has lost its way, that there are internal divisions that are preventing it from moving forward as a powerful, cohesive force. How do you respond to them?
Well, I think any time that there's a movement that's based in social media, it has a diffuse nature. There's no one figurehead. There's no one leader who calls the shots.
It's not just social media, though. It's 600 plus Indigenous communities in Canada with leaders.
Yeah, absolutely. And so the point that I would make is this: is that when you organize on social media, or when you organize a group with such a diverse cultural heritage as the combined Indigenous nations within Canada, you're dealing with many voices. But the thing is, that's what democracy is.
That's
it's
what Occupy Wall Street was, though, too, right?
Yeah, no, but it's about gathering about all these voices together and then trying to forward a common direction forward out of it. So what I would say, the optimistic person in me is that what we're witnessing right now with all these divisions playing out, with people expressing their objections to certain courses of action that are taking place within the movement, is that we are in the process, somewhat rancorous, somewhat noisy process of building that common direction forward. So yes, right now it looks messy, but over the coming weeks and months, I believe that people are going to continue harnessing the energy that Idle No More has unleashed so far and trying to smooth out those divisions.
How do you do that without a single or a small number of figureheads that are defining the pathway forward?
This is the way that our people govern themselves in traditional times prior to contact. We build consensus by hearing the voices of all community members, women, elders, young people, and then the leaders who went out were not leaders who called the shots, but just spokespeople for the direction that had been sent by the community. So if we're smart about this and we manage to harness some consensus building process using a combination of social media and meetings in the real world, we actually have the chance to sort of rebuild those traditional governance systems that have been eroded over the years since the Indian Act and other forms of legislation in Canada impacted our communities.
Well, Tanya, I'd like you to follow up on this, Tanya, in our Google Plus Hangout. There's a tweet here from Samantha, and she says, Canada has the duty to consult with Canada's Indigenous in order to develop and use natural resources. And this, of course, is something that we heard a little bit earlier in the show. I'd like you to elaborate on that and let us know what Canada's First Nation leaders are doing.
Okay, can I just first go back a little bit to the comments about the smallpox blankets and how Bill C-45 has sort of been compared to that? Because I think that's an important thing to think about, because when blankets are given to First Nations people, they did not know that they were infested with the smallpox virus. And the blankets were given to them as a gift in a way that was supposed to offer them protection and warmth. And I think if you look back to the earlier comments about Bill C-45 that you received from the Minister's office that talk about how this legislation is supposed to be for the economic benefit of First Nations people and participation in the economy, that's the same kind of parallel. They're putting in these changes with this whole premise that it's for our best interest, when really it isn't. It's the changes to Bill C-45 allow greater access to what Indian lands are left and protected through the Indian Act, as well as access to the waters, the bodies of waters, the rivers and lakes. So while the Government of Canada puts forth this idea that this is for the benefit of the Canadian economy, and in particular First Nations people, that's part of that whole premise of we're doing what's right for them, but really it's not.
A lot of blame has been placed on the federal government for many things, including living conditions of the Indigenous. But then there are also those within the community who blame themselves. We found this in the comments section of an article explaining the Idle No More movement, where one person said, yes, the government is responsible for many atrocities, but over time we've become our own worst enemies. It's all about choices and chances. It's your choice to stay in the res rut. You don't like it? Do something about it. Stop relying on government to fix us. Stop being a victim. Stop the dysfunctional, banned politics and infighting. What about this idea of self-determination, Wab? Has that somehow lost its way in all of this?
I think an important part of the Idle No More movement is that we're walking our culture back into the national collective conscience of Canada. And what you're seeing is that there are solutions coming from Indigenous communities in Canada. People are, revitalizing education. People are working towards revitalizing the language. People are trying to create economic development opportunities in their own backyards, create jobs and things like that. So part of the movement is to cast light onto that, to start sharing the success stories that we have in our communities. Unfortunately, it makes for worse headlines than a blockade. So that doesn't get the same sort of media attention. But that is happening. People are talking. People are saying, this is what we're doing over here. Here's how you could do it in your own backyard. Here's what we're finding success with. So I hear what that commenter is saying. I think it's very important for us to recognize that at the end of the day, the solutions that we seek are not going to come from politicians. The solutions are going to come from ourselves. The only people who are invested enough to make the long-term, time commitment to turn things around in our communities is our own people, right? We're the ones left holding the bag at the end of the day. So we have to do that. But that being true doesn't mean that we can let the other people off the hook for sure the politicians have a role to play. The different levels of government in Canada have a role to play. What I would like to see happen with Idle No More energizing so many people in Canada is to have Aboriginal people stand up and start, walking the talk around sovereignty. We want to be nations. Okay, let's do that. Let's put that into practice, and then we look at the relationship with the federal government, the provincial governments at the same time. So, like any relationship, it's a two-way street. We need to do things. The different levels of Canadian society need to do things as well.
Don't mean to cut you off, but I want to talk about some of the obstacles towards doing that. Erica Lee in our Google Plus Hangout, I'd like to direct this to you. In the post that Lisa read a little bit earlier, the last line of it said, "Stop being a victim." And I wonder what you're seeing online, of course, as a Facebook manager for Idle No More campaign. We're seeing things like this from UCS Panther. This is a comment left on a YouTube video. "Pack of beggars and parasites." There's another one here. "Natives should take their issues to their forefathers. It was their forefathers who sold them out for cheap whiskey." So we're seeing things that, of course, definitely smack of racism. What are you seeing?
I see a lot of those comments on the Facebook page, but it's important, to take the negative with the positive. On a Facebook page, you're going to get a very polarizing attitude. You're going to get the people who support you, and you're going to get the trolls. I think Redneck Boy, or whatever his name was, is one of them. But for me, those kind of messages motivate me, because for me, Idle No More is about education. It's about informing people about the history that we're still living with today as Indigenous peoples. Even as a 22-year-old, I still face racism. I still face barriers in schooling and education, in poverty and racism. It's not ancient history, and that's one of the most important things that we have to broadcast as Idle No More.
Ellen, though, this is an important issue when we're talking about violence against women and racism against these Indigenous communities. Do you feel like there's a security risk for Indigenous peoples who are protesting and who are standing up?
Yeah, I think that we've seen a few examples of people who have not respected the protesters, and the police themselves being part to blame because they haven't blocked the roads properly. But if we go back to the issue of the woman who was raped in Thunder Bay by two white men, and she was told that they had done this before, and this is what Aboriginal people deserve. We know that Amnesty International themselves have documented through their Stolen Sisters report from 2004 and so on. The UN has also asked Canada to have a national plan of action in regards to dealing with the issue of murdered and missing Indigenous women. Nothing is being done because it all comes down to whether the Treasury Board thinks it's going to be of economic benefit to our communities. So this is the kind of attitude that we are dealing with the government of Canada. And yes, very much, I do believe that our safety is at risk because we do have a lot of people who don't know the issues, who base it on racist stereotypes, and think because their government is silent and condoning and saying nothing about these racist acts, that it's okay to do it. And Amnesty has said that Aboriginal women in Canada are the most vulnerable and marginalized because the authorities have allowed perpetrators to do these kinds of actions against us with impunity.
So, Jarrett, how do you change the historical narrative then that creates this kind of racism? I mean, there's a belief that Indigenous people are a problem. How do you shift that belief?
Well, I think, as we've seen, obviously this has only been going on for, this particular part of the movement in terms of Idle No More has only been going on for a couple of months, and we've seen the kind of racism that's come out as a result of that. I think that we're in the midst of a longer process of mutual re-education on what the history and the current state of our people is. I think that trying to address colonialism is a very, very big project that involves all of us. And I think, as Wab said, this is about trying to repair relationships on both sides of the equation. So it requires work on the Indigenous community level. It requires work in relationship to government, and it absolutely requires that process to be engaged by the non-native population of Canada. And I think that that mutual re-education work also requires a voluntary participation of people to confront their own ways in which they've benefited from the historical realities of colonial oppression. And that means that it's going to take a lot of time, and it's going to take a lot of patience, and it's going to take overcoming the kinds of stereotypes that stand in the way. And I think that anytime when you look at historical civil rights movements and other movements for justice, when what you're calling out is, if not a legacy, but an ongoing, in our case, continued reality of that form of oppression and racism, when you're calling out the other side for the ways in which it benefits from that, there's going to be a lot of pushback. There's going to be a lot of resistance because people don't want to believe that they're a part of the problem. Everybody wants to believe that we're all part of a nice system that's well functioning. But, I don't know more has said, look, the status quo is not working for our people. It's not working for Canada. And in order for us, all of us to have a better relationship, we need to be in this together and work a lot more hard than we have been.
Well, and looking forward, Webb, there's a tweet here from Mikey. He says, is there a combined Native Congress to unify the voices of Idle No More to make it more cohesive and less divided?
Well, right now there is a national organization called the Assembly of First Nations, which is part of the origin of all the conflict that's playing out in the media, is because there's a power struggle going on within that organization. But, the Assembly of First Nations itself is a little bit, flawed as being the mouthpiece of Canada's Indigenous people for two reasons. One, it's the elected band officials who vote in the national chief, not the people of the communities. And two, because they only represent the people who live on reserves. They don't represent the majority of the population who live in the urban centers of Canada. So definitely, I think that there is an opportunity for us to come together and create a new national platform that speaks to the issues that matter to Indigenous people in Canada. And what I would like to see happen is for the leaders who have emerged within Idle No More, some of whom you see in the Google Hangout right there, Tanya Capo, Ellen Gabriel, Jarrett Martineau, you know what I mean, to have some of these voices stand up and start the process of, codifying this and putting in a little bit more of an organizational structure into Idle No More, so that we can eliminate all this talk of like, oh, what do they really want? What are they really asking for? And then we can lay out a plan, whether it's a 4-point, 10-point, 8-point plan, whatever. We just laid out, here's what we're talking about. Here is the people that you can go talk to. And then we reach out to the grassroots and we say, this is the way forward that we are proposing is going to make real change for the kids in our communities. And then we ask the people to come in and stand behind that. And I mean, like, for us, this is not some abstract, discussion about treaty rights. This is not something pie in the sky. Last night, I lost a relative to suicide. This continues on. And it's not like we can say, oh, that beautiful young girl that I grew up with is dead because of the Indian Act. But at the same time, we can't throw up our hands and say that they are not related. All these challenges that our people face, whether it's suicide, whether it's oppression, whether it's the Indian Act, whether it's lack of educational opportunities, they're all related. What Idle No More is saying is now is the time for Indigenous people to stand up and assert our own control over our own destiny, and to reach out to our allies both within Canada and around the globe to say, stand with us.
Rob, I'm going to pause you there. We're going to put this conversation on hold, so please join us in the post-show in a few minutes. But first, Malika's got a few other leads we're following.
In the Google Maps version of the world, North Korea was one of the largest blank spots on Earth. Now, thanks to citizen cartographers, the world is zooming in for a closer look. This Washington Post interactive shows how most of the country was previously listed as nothing but white space. But now, map makers have filled that space with roads, city names, and golf courses, and even prison camps. For Google, it's a major step towards a more transparent view of North Korea. Our next lead has netizens celebrating an announcement that the Netherlands will soon have a new king. But the excitement isn't from where you'd expect. The buzz comes from Argentina, home to the future king's wife. Hashtag Maxima Reina, or Queen Maxima, trended across Argentina. Lady Absolute writes, fairy tales do exist. Others were more cynical. In the 21st century, there are still kings and queens, and it makes some people happy. Well, lastly, in Egypt, Twitter has been ablaze over the country's latest unrest. Even a 5-star hotel is getting a piece of the action. The Intercontinental Semiramis sent out this stream of panicked tweets Monday night, asking for help against unknown intruders. Well, journalist Dan Murphy summed up netizen suspicions. If a major hotel is under attack in the middle of Cairo, it should be confirmable by some means other than a Twitter account. But more details soon emerged online. The Semiramis has temporarily closed, and blogger Mohammed tweeted this photo of guests leaving the hotel. Now, this developing story continues to unfold on social media, and you can find it at stream.aljazeera.com. Lisa?
All right, stay with us because the Post Show is next at stream.aljazeera.com. Now, in tomorrow's program, Australia's approach to gun violence. After a mass shooting prompted the government to enact strict gun laws, have they made the country a safer place? Send us your thoughts and your questions on that, and until then, we'll see you online. Welcome to the Streams Online Post Show. We're continuing our discussion on Canada's Idle No More movement. The Indigenous community is protesting what they see as an erosion of rights by the government. With us are Wab Canoe, Ellen Gabriel, Erica Lee, Jarrett Martineau, and Tanya Capo, all members of Canada's Indigenous community. And Ellen, I want to get back to you. You know, the Canadian government says that there's a stable relationship between Indigenous communities and the government. And in fact, that C-45, this bill, which is now law that we've been talking about, actually presents lots of economic opportunity for Indigenous communities. Are you seeing any of that?
No, and we've never seen any kind of economic communities benefits, because we have the Indian Act. We have the Minister of Indian Affairs who actually makes the final decisions, and we've seen that a lot of the jobs are the more low-paying jobs. But at the end of the day, I think what is most important to remember is that you're not going to be able to eat money when your land and water is contaminated. And so this whole economic benefit spin that the government is using to try and coerce our communities into accepting development without our free, prior, and informed consent, saying that they know best, is just a perpetuation of colonialism, but at the same time seems to justify to their constituents the kind of violations to their environmental impact laws. The Prime Minister Harper said when he got in, omnibus bills are undemocratic, and yet this is what he's done. So it worries me that this kind of spin is going to be used as part of the propaganda to convince people that this omnibus bill is good.
All right. Well, you know, some people have actually called into question whether those in the Idle No More movement have lost their identity. In one opinion piece written by Canadian journalist Christy Bradford, she even goes as far as questioning whether enough Indigenous culture remains. This is an excerpt. She says, "So while Chief Spence and others may long for nation-to-nation discussions, there is, I think, a genuine question as to whether there's enough of Aboriginal culture that has survived to even dream of that lofty status, or if the culture isn't irreparably damaged already. Smudging, drumming, and the like do not a nation make." Wab, is the culture too far gone? Has there been such a loss of tradition and language that, I guess the question is, can it not only remain and sustain itself, but grow?
What I would say to this is, like, like, you know, I'm very happy to be able to tell you that I'm a member of our traditional religion, the Videwan, and I do so in the Anishinaabe language, which is a language that I grew up around. It's hilarious that she says that smudging and drumming do not a nation make. Actually, that's exactly what makes a nation, is culture combined with language and land. We have all those things within our communities.
But
we have a land base. No, actually,
no,
they're stronger now than there ever are.
extinct.
Well, it's true that there are some languages that are under threat, but if you look at the big ones, the Ojibwe, Cree, Inuktitut, they are going to survive for the next 100 years. And if you look at the Haudenosaunee languages, particularly Cayuga and Mohawk, they've actually seemingly turned the corner, and they're now in a revitalization stage. I suspect the same thing is underway with the Lakota and Dakota languages. What you're seeing, the reason why Idle No More is strong is because there's two things happening, and they're at work within the same actors within the Idle No More movement. You're seeing people going out and getting educated in the Western system. Like, look at the panel. These are all PhDs and lawyers and, you know, people working on their undergraduate degrees. And at the same time that they're getting educated in the Western system, they're reaffirming their connection to their traditional cultures, and they're learning their languages. They're learning the roles in the ceremonies. They're learning the roles within the Longhouse and the Sundance and all those things. So Christy Bradford, she's free because she has, you know, this position as a columnist to say whatever it is that she wants. But if you look at the reality of the situation on the ground, the statistics belie what she's saying.
Well, Erica, in our hangout, I know that you have a follow-up. You want to chime in on this discussion. Go ahead.
I think it's also important to note that I'm not sure what she's considering culture, but to me, my Indigenous culture takes place at the University of Saskatchewan as well. Indigenous culture is not a static thing that, you know, that is one like giant glob of culture or something. We all have our own ways of practicing culture, and education is definitely one of those ways now.
Jared, did you want to follow up here, of course, because you're one of those PhD students that was just mentioned?
Yeah, well, I mean, independent of my educational credentials, I mean, Christy Blatchford has made a career out of hating on our people, so that's sort of the first point to note. The second is that she's given a national platform to be able to spew that kind of vitriol against our people, which I think is also worth observing as well. So I mean, like, you know, this is somebody commenting on the state of Aboriginal culture and Indigenous culture who has no involvement with Native people, who is not Indigenous, who has no concept of what it means to be a part and a member of an Indigenous community.
So Jared, how much of an obstacle then does somebody like that present to your movement going forward? Because she's somebody that Canadians at large read.
Well, I mean, you know, the mainstream media serves the purposes that it serves. I think, for my part, and certainly an area that I think is a huge potential for us, is in building our own media. And I think that Indigenous media has had a really big upsurge in the last 5 years across, as we've seen, obviously, with mobilized through social media. But I think that there's been a lot of good writing, good thinking, and good media work that's being done by a lot of members of our community. And I think that increasing our representation, both in terms of those mainstream avenues, but also building our own platforms, is a huge way we can get the word out.
Would you agree with that? Internal media is what's needed?
Yeah, and I mean, that's what you're seeing with social media, right? This is a movement largely powered by Skype, Twitter, Spreecast, Facebook. And so, I mean, Aboriginal people, at the same time that they're reaffirming and, you know, showing our culture back into public again with things like the flash mob round dances, we're also spreading the word using social media and just, you know, connecting community to community. And to the larger point about what the role is, you know, of commentators who, you know, have anti-Indigenous worldviews, I think it's fine for those people to share their points of view. It gives us a good jumping-off point for having a discussion, so that we can actually assuage the concerns that, you know, Canadian people may have, and people around the globe may have. But when you look at it, there was this big study in Canada done a few years back called the Urban Aboriginal People Study. The results are considered valid until 2015. And what they found is that amongst non-Indigenous Canadians, it splits down evenly almost into quartiles. So 25% of the population hates us no matter what. Mm-hmm. There's nothing we can do to win them over. 25% of the population couldn't care less. Out of sight, out of mind. 25% of the population thinks that we're these romantic creatures from a bygone era who, you know, are connected to nature, which is true, by the way. And then the final quartile of the population believes that, or are what are called engaged allies. So they're people who actually have real contact to Indigenous communities. They know what the issues are, and they are willing to give us a benefit of the doubt and participate to a certain extent in working towards solutions. So I think when we look at the situation like that, of course we're going to have a lot of, you know, media voices who represent that sort of 25% that we're never going to win over, no matter what. What we have to focus on, as far as, you know, Jared's point about, you know, trying to engage our own media platforms to win over the broader public sentiment in Canada, we have to focus on that 25% who are relatively ignorant or unengaged with the issues. You know, that's where we're going to go from the 50% who support us into the majority that we need in order to win
and based on this
lasting
tweet
change.
From Chandresh on Twitter, it looks like that's happening. They say, I Don't Know More movement is an inspiration for Indigenous communities around the world with similar issues.
And yeah, you've seen a lot of people, Asia, New Zealand, Europe, you know, even parts of Africa, you know, express solidarity and, you know, small actions like that. And I think it speaks to a connection between Indigenous communities that's been building over the last 20 to 30 years, with Indigenous communities taking their case, you know, to the United Nations and other international forums. Now that we have social media and, you know, Twitter and YouTube, and we're able to share the powerful images of what we're doing with each other, the powerful messages of what we're doing, then you're starting to see those alliances, or at least, you know, signs of solidarity playing out.
Right. Jared, we've got about 30 seconds left in the program. I want to give you the last word.
I'd like to pass the word to someone else who hasn't had a chance to speak, so I pass it to one of the women that's on here with me.
Ellen, you want to pick that up? You've got about 20 seconds.
The UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People is the framework for reconciliation, which was introduced as a private members bill yesterday. And I think we need to make this a human rights issue, an environmental issue, the rights of Mother Earth, and really unite. I think that's how we're going to unite people and put this into the education system in all the schools and teach the Prime Minister of Canada what reconciliation really means.
All right. Our thanks to Wab Canoe, Ellen Gabriel, Erica Lee, Jarrett Martineau, and Tanya Capo. Now, in tomorrow's program, Australia's approach to gun violence after a mass shooting prompted the government to enact strict gun laws. Have those laws made the country a safer place? Send us your thoughts on that, and until then, we'll see you online.